Hello and welcome to a special YouTube-only edition of the In the Money Players podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatow, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker once again, getting ready to head down to Baltimore, as is another one of today's guests. The third is already there. That man who's already in Baltimore, we are very happy to have back. You know him from the fantastic work he does in many places, but among them, NBC's coverage of thoroughbred racing. He's Randy Moss. Randy, what's going on?
Thank you, sir. I'm in the Baltimore bunker.
What are things like down there? Is there, there gets to be a buzz in the city. Usually it's not till later in the week, but with this early draw, I don't know. Is there already some Preakness chatter going on amongst the sports fans in Baltimore?
I'm not a good person to ask that, Pete, because I landed at about noon and then I went to Starbucks and sat in at Starbucks and watched some races on the undercard on Saturday, and then got in my car, fired up my computer, and here I am. I have talked to zero denizens of the city of Baltimore right now.
Well,
wait, Randy, your primary job when you be there is to tidy up that trailer. Did you get that in?
It's already been tidied up. Mr.
Okay.
Spencer, who is our producer, Pete, is in there with Corey Newmy, our director, and Amy Zimmerman. There's only one empty chair in there, and it's got Jerry Bailey's name on it.
And that's the other voice you hear, of course, the Hall of Famer, the legendary rider and fantastic analyst. We also love having on these airwaves, whether it's by himself or in this comedy duo act we put together once in a while. Jerry, how are things? You getting ready to head down there and whip this award-winning TV crew into shape?
Tomorrow morning, I had to get 18 holes in today, and had to give Randy time to tidy up the trailer. But apparently that's been done already. So yeah, I'll leave in the morning and we'll join up tomorrow midday.
Excellent. Well, let's start with the obvious place, which is this year's Preakness Stakes. And we'll ask the high-level question first. Jerry, are you surprised that only one runner from the Kentucky Derby 2 weeks ago is making a start in this year's Preakness?
No, I mean, every year it's a lot of the same thing. Nobody wants to run back in 2 weeks. Of course, the winner, if they're healthy, they'll get to go. Look at last year, Rich Strike didn't even want to run back.
Right.
So it's beginning to be a common theme, and Buddy Randy has the solution. He's been telling this industry the solution for at least 10 years, maybe more. What's the solution, Randy?
We'll bring in the reprise.
It's just that they need to be spaced out more. I mean, it's just common sense. It's easy. I mean, I've said it a jillion times, and I think people think that's all I think about by now. But when we roll around to Baltimore every year, it seems to be getting worse and worse. And quite frankly, the only reason Mage is running back is because co-owner Ramiro Restrepo is a huge student of history, racing history, and he feels, I believe, some sort of obligation to run Mage back. Now, I'm not saying that, that he shouldn't be running back and that they're pushing the envelope or anything, but I mean, they conceded that 2 weeks was back a little quickly, but they think he bounced out of it well, so they're going to give it a shot.
Remind me of and I don't want to go too deep on this tangent, but it came up, and I think a lot of people are going to accuse me of a host fail if I don't ask. Remind me the specific spacing that you think would work, Randy, in your reimagined version of the Triple Crown.
Well, it could be anything. I think there needs to be at least 4 weeks between the Derby and Preakness, and 4 to 5 weeks between the Preakness and Belmont. Memorial Day, 4th of July could work. But on the calendar, the way it works out is that some years it would be on the holidays and some years it wouldn't. But yeah, that's the kind of spacing, so that if it's 9 weeks from the Derby to the Preakness, you're not going to have Todd Pletcher running in the Derby with Tappet Trice and waiting 9 weeks to come back in the Belmont Stakes. And, right. Oh, by the way, Pletcher, the guy who has benefited the most from the 5-week gap between the Derby and the Belmont, conceded to Jerry and I last year that, it might not be good for him necessarily, but he thinks that the time has come to seriously consider spacing out the races for the good of the sport and the good of the Triple Crown.
It's I mean, you make a compelling case. You know, we had the fun debate with Stephen Christ last year, but when you see results like this, it's hard to not at least concede that it's a data point in your favor, Randy.
One more thing.
Oh, we might have had Randy freeze on us. Let's see. Jerry, are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, we'll wait for him to unfreeze. He might have to leave.
I've got a question, Pete.
Yeah.
The last time we were on this, you had that shirt on. Have you been wearing that for 2 weeks?
Oh, that's very funny. No, it's been to the laundry. It's
Okay.
come back, and we're now ready to get, because that was what happened is also we had some Derby preview content sponsored by the Preakness Future Wager, thus the shirt then, and now obviously for the Preakness itself it comes back.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, I'm glad. Now, Randy, did we get you back? We had you freeze there for a second, but I'm tempted to leave this in because Jerry's been trolling me very hilariously.
It's that NBC internet that Jerry and I have to deal with on a regular basis. What I was saying before I think Naira's the one that pulled the plug, honestly. What I was saying is that people who are against spacing the Triple Crown races always cite history. Okay. History is actually the reason why they need to be spaced differently. There is no bigger history in the Triple Crown than the concept of a horse running against the best 3-year-olds of his generation in 3 consecutive races, the Derby, Preakness, Belmont. That's not happening. It's not happening. The best horses, okay, some of them show up in the Preakness, but most of them don't. And the Preakness has been drastically weakened. And from a historical perspective, something needs to be done to make the Triple Crown whole again.
From a marketing point of view, Jerry, this year, does Mage's presence give us enough to, be able to really rah-rah and champion this? Or do you think with only one horse back from the Preakness, from the Derby into the Preakness, that it diminishes the race just in terms of this year's running, forgetting about what might be best for the sport, writ large?
Well, it's always better when you have the Derby winner come. I mean, we didn't have it last year, and it was kind of flat, very flat. So yeah, it's always better because if he wins, then you have the prospect of a Triple Crown. So yes, he's worthy. He was the best horse in the Kentucky Derby, and as Randy will tell you, because he's told me and he's right, more often than not, the best horse in the Derby comes back and he wins the Preakness.
Hey, Jerry and I don't have a difference of opinion very often, but we have a difference of opinion there. I don't think he was the best horse in the Kentucky Derby. To me, Two Phils would be the favorite in the Preakness if he had come back and run in Baltimore. I'm convinced Two Phils would be the betting favorite.
Well, wait a minute. I'm not saying he would be betting favorite. Why do you think he was the best horse in the Derby?
I do. Totally.
Why?
Because he was close to a pace that was toxic for everybody else, and he still was beaten less than a length.
So he got through on the rail, and he got through on the rail, and Mage had to go 4 wide, around the entire final turn. You think that Two Phils was the best horse?
Mage benefited from the pace primarily, as did Angel Empire. So just it's a difference of opinion.
Yeah,
it's great. That's why we do these shows. We sit here and we all agree. What fun is that? Unfortunately, we don't get to be betting on the rematch at this stage, though. Surely it'll come down a little bit later in the year. But I do think you bring up a great point, both of you, about trip handicapping and how we evaluate trips and how there is a subjectivity weighing ground loss, which Jerry cites, versus pace dynamics, which Randy cites. And for me, what even makes it more tricky is there are some racetracks on which I would argue either point. There are some racetracks that are so inside dominant that I think Jerry's point of view would win the day. For me, I'm not sure if the Derby track was quite that way, so I'm a little more sympathetic to Randy's point of view. But again, it's all academic at this stage. The money question we need to answer is to go back to the Lexington Stakes and look at that race that First Mission ran, and using the collateral form line of Disarm, through that lens, you could certainly compare Mage and First Mission. On the official buyer speed figures, we still have something to find if we're First Mission backers going up against Mage. But do you think this progressive horse owned by Godolphin is talented enough to give Mage a race? And we'll start with you, Jerry.
You're starting with me?
Yeah. Can First Mission hang with Mage?
Yeah, I mean, he can hang with him. Of course he can hang with him. I think it's not a fair comparison, though, to use Disarm. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because I don't think Disarm was full crank for the Lexington. Steve put him in there for the points. He wanted to get the points and no more because he was wheeling back again on short rest. So I would say that Disarm probably wasn't screwed down really tight for the Lexington. But what was the margin of difference between First Mission and Disarm and Mage and Disarm? Approximately the same?
4.5 versus 4 3/4, something like that,
Okay.
if I'm remembering that right.
All right. So maybe a little advantage Mage there because I do think Disarmed was cranked for the Kentucky Derby. But it's close. Look, to me, the biggest difference is First Mission, he now has the outside post where he was the beneficiary of an inside trip at Lexington. So he probably won't get that trip in Baltimore.
I'm intrigued. The only thing I could argue, I take your point very well about not taking that collateral form line too literally. But the other thing we do have is a First Mission who's been laid out for this since at least the day after that last run versus Mage coming back in the connection zone, admittedly, maybe not ideal 2 weeks. Maybe First Mission's progressive profile with only the 3 runs could help narrow that gap. Where do you stand? Is First Mission, Randy,
I think things that would narrow the gap. First of all, the 105 buyer speed figure that Mage got in the Kentucky Derby represented the steady improvement that the horses had. So was aided by the pace setup that he's probably not going to get in the Preakness. The pace looks on paper now. We thought that before the Kentucky Derby also. But the pace looks on paper to be much more modest than it turned out to be in the Kentucky Derby. And that's a point, I think, that's pro First Mission and anti-Mage. Then there's the 2-week thing versus more time for First Mission. And there's the fact that First Mission is also improving. So I think First Mission is in with a really, really good chance.
What kind of a trip do you want to see Jerry aboard Mage in the Preakness? Do you think he'll be able to stay closer, or do you think they've decided at this point after these last 2 big runs that he wants to come from further back?
It's all dependent on his break. If he breaks with the field, he can be positioned about anywhere Javier Castellano's jockey wants to. He can move at any time. I mean, Randy and I both saw in the Florida Derby, he moved too soon. I mean, push button. He was there when the rider asked him. He made the lead. He looked a winner, and then he bottomed out. So it is about timing the move. But if he breaks well, I think he's positioned about where he wants, and he can wait and move when he wants, depending on the pace.
Being the shorter field Preakness, maybe that does bring a little bit more rider tactics into play. I'm curious to see if this pace is going to play out, Randy, as you were saying, on the slower side, or if First Mission joins the party early, if Mage joins the party early, if we couldn't have a real throwdown from a bit farther out. How are you? What's your best guess, Randy, as to how it's going to play out and who's going to get the best of the trips?
Well, I think from the number 1 post position and with blinkers on, which is a pretty good indicator, and we haven't had a chance to talk to Bob Baffert yet, but it's just telling you right there that National Treasure is probably meant to be very forward, and I think he's the most likely horse to set the pace. I mean, he's coming off some pretty fast-paced races in Southern California, and even though I didn't see that he had any excuse in the Santa Anita Derby, I think he's the most likely pace setter. I think First Mission won't be far back, and neither will the local horse Coffee with Chris. And other than that, that's it. I mean, most of the other horses in the field are confirmed 1-run closers, including Mage.
If you were in the National Treasure camp and looking to conjure an excuse for the last run, you might talk about that little bit of training he had missed. My issue is with this horse is that you've got a horse that on the numbers is demonstrably too slow, and yet he's going to catch a lot of money because his trainers won the race 6 times, and he's just, he has an obvious profile. If he was a 10-1, I'd be interested. At the 4 or 5-1, I question whether he is worth getting too involved with. Of course, you were just talking, Randy, about him being there at the pace call. Jerry, do you think there's a chance National Treasure could be there at the end?
I don't. I think he's too slow. And I do think First Mission, just by virtue of his post, has to use some of his early speed to get over going in the first turn. And that in of itself, if Coffee with Chris doesn't go, puts First Mission right on Mage's, on his tail. And even if he gets a first quarter fairly comfortably, I think the heat gets turned up at least in the middle of the backside.
Yeah, what I was disappointed with, Pete, in the Santa Anita Derby for National Treasure, if you think back on the race, the two Sunland Park horses just took off as expected, and they opened up on the field, and National Treasure was sitting back in a joint third along with Practical Move. They were side by side, sitting in right next to each other, right? And they stayed that way until the far turn. Both horses at that point were being ridden along, and Skinner comes up 4 wide and just blows National Treasure's doors off to his immediate outside, just rushes right past him. And National Treasure had no response. And in a flash, in the 16th of a mile, National Treasure goes from, oh, look, he's moving with Practical Move, to all of a sudden sitting back in fourth, about 2 or 3 lengths off the pace and dead in the water. And he went ahead and finished out evenly after that, kind of one pace through the lane. But at the critical juncture of the Santa Anita Derby, he didn't have it. So that's what worries me about him, and why I tend to agree with Jerry that he just might not be fast enough.
The other horse that projects to be single-digit odds in this field that we haven't yet gotten around to is Blazing Sevens. We've seen this movie before with Chad Brown skipping the Derby and having a horse ready to fire at the Preakness. My concerns aren't too dissimilar, though, to what we just talked about National Treasure. Here's a horse sure to catch money because of narrative, because of connections, that just doesn't look fast enough. Is there anything, Jerry, that you're seeing in Blazing Sevens that could make him a contender, if not to win, to at least round out the try here?
I don't trust him. Even if he runs one of his best races, he's maybe third. But I don't even trust him to run one of the best. I can't figure the horse out. So, he's completely lost my confidence.
Yeah, on, using the trip handicapping that we've been talking about, the best case I can make for Blazing Sevens is that he did have a 4 wide trip on both turns in the Bluegrass.
Yep.
So you can, you got a 90 buyer speed figure. Using that, you can move him up to easily to a 95, 96 with a better trip in the Preakness. Now, he's also going to have to run a 16th of a mile farther, and I didn't necessarily like the way he finished at 1 1/8 in the Bluegrass. He was right there in striking position along with Tapit Trice and Verifying at the quarter pole in the Bluegrass, and they left him behind. I think his last 8th was in 13, and, I don't think that's going to cut it. So I have a question about how far he wants to go as well as his talent, but I could see him 3rd or 4th.
4 long shots or longer shots are going to be rounding out the field here. Do either of you have a particular case to make, again, whether it's a win or a run in the money on some of these horses that might light up the tote board at Pimlico? Perform is really going in the right direction. And his last, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage people to go back and watch the video. He looked like he had no chance turning for home, no chance in mid-stretch, all kinds of traffic, and then just explodes late. And they think highly enough about him to, what was it, $150,000 supplemental nomination? Yep.
Shug McGahee's pretty conservative. He recommended that. And Shug is really high on him, and I wouldn't discount him from not only being in the exotics, to even have a chance to win.
Would he need a meltdown for in that scenario, do you think, Randy, or do you think he can step up?
I don't necessarily think so. I think he's headed in the right direction. If Mage comes back a little bit in a moderately paced race, and maybe the 2 weeks doesn't work in his favor, and that suddenly throws it wide open, because I think Jerry may have a different opinion, but at a good price, I think Perform is as attractive, if not more attractive, from a betting standpoint than National Treasure or Blazing Sevens.
It'll certainly be a multiple of the price. What do you think of Perform and these other longer shots here, Jerry?
Well, if you just go back and look Perform's last race, he was in everybody's back pocket in the stretch. He literally got to run about 100 yards. That's it. Maybe not even that. So this number that he has, 85 buyer, to me, if he had a chance to run at the 16th pole even, it'd probably be a 91 or 2. So, yeah, I think he's a lot better than what the paper shows. He's on the improve. If all horses, I go into races thinking, okay, if every horse runs their best race, where is it? If every horse runs their best race, I think he's third at best. But if the top 2 horses regress a little bit, he could be third easily and even closer.
Time to hold feet to the fire on this year's Preakness. I'll ask you guys. I mean, we're a few days out here, so you can soften off this if you want. But who are you picking? What do you think is the most the way, not just the most likely winner, but the way to wager upon this year's Preakness Stakes, Jerry?
Well, I'm going to go with Mage, but I'm going with the leap of faith. He's going to break well enough to be in front of the close. I don't think he wants to be behind those horses. If he can be in back of the pace horses and in front of the deep closers, I think he gets any kind of trip Javier wants, and I think he's the horse to beat.
And
Randy, where are you landing?
Pete, from a betting standpoint, I like a trifecta: First Mission on top and Mage and Perform back and forth underneath. And I would even play a saver with Perform on top if he's 10-1 or higher, let's say.
Which I think he should be. I do think there'll be enough narrative on those other runners that it's not going to be one of these things where everybody sees the points that you guys have made on this show and the market gets flipped. I think you'll definitely have an opportunity there. Obviously, folks can catch you on NBC. I want to go over the broadcast schedule. On Friday, you're going to be on Peacock. What time do you start, and what can we look forward to you covering?
I start whenever Jerry goes to the set. I think I've said that before.
We're 4:30 to 7 on Peacock Friday.
Okay, excellent. We're going to get back to Black Eyed Susan Day because I know you have a strong opinion on that. Jerry has sort of a little closing thought. But Saturday, it's big NBC, and you're going to be on for a good long chunk of time.
Yeah, we're on at 1 o'clock on CNBC, and we go over to 4:30 on NBC. Randy's going to be there at 12, but I'm not going to be there till 1.
We're not on at noon. See, what do I know? Hell, I've been studying the Sir Barton. I guess I don't need to.
No.
Let's talk about the Black Eyed Susan really quickly. Again, Jerry, you tipped your hand off air that you've got a strong opinion here. What do you think's going to happen?
It's no secret. I mean, I'm no genius to pick Faiza. She's undefeated. Randy came with this first before me, that she's the best 3-year-old filly in the country, and I agree with him. She's never far from the lead. She's got an explosive move. Middle of the turn, it looks like she's just creeping up on him. All of a sudden, middle of the turn, she'll just gain 2 or 3 lengths in a heartbeat. There's a couple of interesting fillies in here. The filly coming out of Florida, A Sacred Wish, and Merlaza from Oakland Park are both interesting fillies, but I just think the Baffert filly is too strong.
She really stepped up on the clock last time.
Faiza over Merlaza, Pete.
Okay. All right. We got a couple of exactas, some trifectas. We got a lot of action headed this way. Can't wait to, I'll be there at Pimlico. Hopefully I'll get to see you guys this time. The Derby ended up being a bit of a shipwreck in that regard. But in any case, we'll be recording and watching the fantastic
Pete, I've got one final question.
Hit me.
Are you wearing that shirt Saturday?
Do I have time to get it cleaned again? Yeah, I think I can, Jerry. I think.
Because what do you think? I may not recognize you without it.
Would it look good with a sport coat over it? Do you think I can get away with that?
Sure.
I'll be there. Now you've made my wardrobe choice for me, but I got to get to the laundry today if this plan is going to work. Okay. Guys, really appreciate this as I do all of your coverage, and have a fantastic time down there at the Preakness. We'll be talking soon.
Sayonara.
Take care.
For Jerry Bailey and Randy Moss, I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your Preakness Day photos.